Welcome everybody to the Curator conversation in coordination with the exhibit on the life of Bredendieck from Aurich to Atlanta. We're really pleased that you've joined us today, and my name is Catherine Mancy. I'm the Public Programming and Community Engagement Librarian for the Georgia Tech Library. I'm really honored to welcome the German Consul General for Atlanta, Dr. Eike Fuller, to give us an introduction to today's event.
A warm welcome to all of you listening to us on your computer screens today. In April 1919, the Bauhaus in Weimar was opened. Despite its short existence of only 14 years and the forced moves to Dessau and Berlin, the art school had a decisive influence on the design and architecture of the 20th century. The founder Walter Gropius pursued the dream of creating a new art of building. Art and craft should be united. He called this art Bauhaus, like the name of his school. The Bauhaus is therefore not too much a concrete style of art, but the coming together of artists of different styles who pursue a common goal. To this day, the Bauhaus stands for bold, rational designs. For contemporaries, these were first confronted with modern architecture in the 1920s. The new houses and objects were often a shock. Here in Atlanta, the Atlanta Fulton Central Public Library, the last structure designed by Bauhaus movement architect Marcel Breuer, is an architectural Bauhaus landmark. I remember very well the street festival in October 2018, integrating the library building with innovative light art, hip-hop music and dance, celebrating German-American friendship in Atlanta that kicked off the year of German-American friendship under the motto Wunderbar Together. The event highlighted the importance of public art, encouraging American and German audiences to take a closer look at how German architecture in the US reflects the relationship between our two great nations. Today, it is my great pleasure and honor to attend a Bauhaus event that focuses on Bredendieck, a Bauhaus designer who immigrated to the US with his family in 1937 and who is connected to Georgia Tech in Atlanta in a very special way. After initially working at the new Bauhaus Chicago, Bredendieck received a teaching position from the Georgia Institute of Technology in 1952, and as a professor and head of the Industrial Design Department, worked to reshape design instruction based on his many years of practical experience and teaching. For the German immigrant Bredendieck, the call to Georgia Tech must have been a professional dream come true. At Georgia Tech, he was able to develop something of his own, and he permanently, till today, shaped the way the subject of design is taught according to his ideas. And of equal importance, Georgia Tech provided Bredendieck a paid employment that enabled him to feed his family. In a way, Bredendieck had thus lived and realized his very own American dream. He lived Gropius' foundational Bauhaus idea, the coming together of artists of different styles, with Georgia Tech's support of offering him a job. Georgia Tech became a place of purpose for Bredendieck and his work. Therefore, it is not surprising that Atlanta and the southeastern United States became home to him, and it is here where he died in 1995, more than 20 years after he was retired from his position at Georgia Tech in 1971. It is almost a miracle that we have the great privilege of being informed today, more than 25 years after Bredendieck's death, through this exhibition about his work and far-reaching influence on industrial design and production, and thus also on modern culture and our lived reality. After his death, Bredendieck's impressive achievements were sadly forgotten to a great extent. Bredendieck's name was not mentioned together with the big names of the Bauhaus movement. He did not leave behind a single iconic piece of art that made him famous, as art historians point out. Bredendieck's important legacy is that he took out into the wider world the comprehensive significance of the Bauhaus for the development and internationalization of modernity. He was a Bauhaus ambassador to the US and promoted Bauhaus ideas successfully because he fully embraced them. He shaped design education for generations of students till today. And in this regard, he also left a very significant footprint in German-American relations, especially in the science and cultural field. This Bredendieck exhibition is the result of German and American cooperation at its best. Experts in Oldenburg and Atlanta, additional helping hands that are absolutely essential to hold such an exhibition, and generous sponsors like the Halle Foundation, they all contribute significantly to this exhibition. I am very grateful for this extraordinary German-American engagement, and that contributes significantly to further deepen the Bauhaus research, to honor the achievements of this outstanding German, and to make Germans and Americans alike familiar with the Georgia Tech Bredendieck connection. I cannot imagine a more suitable location for this exhibition than the new building of the Georgia Tech Library, which is displaying the German-English exhibition about Hin Bredendieck at his former professional place of work. I hope that many of you will have the chance to visit the exhibition in person. This exhibition is truly a cultural and scientific treasure. Thank you very much. And now it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Professor Barth, Chair of the School of Industrial Design.
Thank you, Dr. Fuller, for the eloquent overview and introduction. I'm very pleased that we have this opportunity to learn more about Hin Bredendieck and his involvement at Georgia Tech and the connection to the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus introduced a revolutionary approach to design with a central focus on user context, iterative design development, and experimentation and prototyping with an extensive array of materials. This approach laid the foundation for design education as we know it today. And this exhibition is particularly relevant for us here at Georgia Tech as it traces the direct connections between our program and the program at the Bauhaus. I'd like to introduce our guest for today. Dr. Rainer Stamm is the co-author of Hin Bredendieck from Aurich to Atlanta. He serves as the director of the Oldenburg State Museum for Art and Cultural History. He is an honorary professor of art history at the University of Bremen with a special focus on modern art history, museum history, and the history of photography and art market history of the early 20th century. And together with Kirk Henderson is the exhibitions program manager for the Georgia Tech Library. Kirk coordinates the design and curation of exhibits in the library, many of which feature the archive's special collection. Formerly a curator at the Atlanta History Center, he collaborated on major exhibit installations about regional history and the American Civil War. So welcome both Kirk and Rainer.
Good morning, Atlanta. Good morning.
What we want to do today is conduct a little dialogue on sort of the background of Bredendieck and his contributions to the field and his contributions to Georgia Tech. So I'd like to begin with a question for both Rainer and Kirk about what is the connection between the Bauhaus and Georgia Tech. Perhaps Rainer, Dr. Stamm, you could respond to that question for us first.
I think it's really Hin Bredendieck because he brought a great part of the Bauhaus ideas from Germany via the new Bauhaus Chicago to Atlanta in the early 1950s. And then he not only used his old ideas from the Bauhaus, from his own Bauhaus experience, but he transformed it into a new pedagogic attempt for the purposes at Atlanta.
Kirk, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I think like part of the connection is that lineage that we can trace, we here at Georgia Tech can trace through Bredendieck, through the Bauhaus. And again, it's that sense of like the educational methods that were initiated at the Bauhaus being very important in constructing the programs and design that we have here at Georgia Tech.
So I'd like to go back and get a little bit of information from Dr. Stamm about how the collaboration between Georgia Tech and yourselves began in putting this exhibition together.
Together with Gloria Köpnick, we started some years ago to prepare the Bauhaus Centenary exhibition for Oldenburg, and we started research on former Bauhaus students from our region at northwestern Germany. And it turned out that between those four students, Bredendieck was the most exciting one. And we started to investigate where his bequest, his papers, where documents, where works of him could be, and tried to find them. And we get contact to the family of Bredendieck and investigated the papers, the bequest, which has been divided between the part in that time in possession of the family, in private ownership, and the other part who still had been stored at the library of the Georgia Tech. And only with connecting those two parts of the bequest and the papers, we could reconstruct a picture or the whole history of Bredendieck, because his history, his story has been divided between those two continents as well. We knew some parts of the very early years at Dessau when he began his study at the Bauhaus and worked for the metal workshop together with Marianne Brandt. We knew only a very few parts in the beginning about his time at Chicago, and we went 2 times to Atlanta to go through the whole material which is in the collection of the Georgia Tech. And we have been very grateful to Kirk Henderson and his team that we could use the whole material and to reconstruct the story.
A significant part of the archive was with Bredendieck's family in Ireland. Can you talk a little bit about that find?
Yeah, when we prepared a symposium on our research, I think it was in 2018, some members of the Bredendieck family came to Oldenburg, and we met them and we talked together. They were very excited, I think, about our interest in their father and grandfather, and we learned that there should be a part of that material in Ireland. We visited the family there, and we found those boxes with sketches, with some photographs, with a lot of material in German, which sure we could read, and we could try to put together to the other stuff we already know. And that has been the very beginning of our plan, not only to realize this exhibition in 2019 about Oldenburg and the Bauhaus students and the Bauhaus history, but to add a second project, a monograph on this nearly forgotten Bauhaus student and very exciting designer, and the teacher, and probably the founder or one of the founders of the industrial design department at Atlanta.
Kirk, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in the exhibition and preparation of the exhibition and the connection to Dr. Stamm?
Sure. To follow up on what Rainer had been saying about the collection, the part of the collection that resides here with Georgia Tech Special Collections and Archives, at the time that we were contacted by Rainer and Gloria, it was still in an unprocessed state. So we were very happy to have some experts come in and review the materials that we had, because part of our working procedures for collections is to sort of examine and arrange and organize the materials so that they can be available for researchers. In that case, 2 or 3 years ago, that had not yet happened with this particular collection. So Rainer and Gloria, in their work and their research, had something of a challenge ahead of them in terms of reviewing the materials. And so the book, of course, sort of unites the story of the European era for Bredendieck and his American period, and it's really the first time with a full story it can be expressed. And the idea of the exhibit came out of the idea that we could leverage our new facilities here at Georgia Tech, which we have recently renovated our buildings, and that includes an exhibit gallery, and that as one of our first efforts in populating that gallery with content would be to focus on this collection. And part of the reason we do exhibits in a library is to focus public attention on the kinds of collections that we have. And so the Bredendieck project was a real a benefit in terms of being another iteration of bringing that whole story of Bredendieck's time, his journey from the Bauhaus to being the head of the industrial design department here at Georgia Tech, to bring that together and to reiterate it in an exhibition form. And so we were quite pleased to do that. And it was also an opportunity to develop the partnership with the Oldenburg Museum and with Rainer to bring that project to fruition.
And I think also from our perspective as a School of Industrial Design, we're very pleased to have this exhibition to feature the growth and origins of the School of Industrial Design as well. It's a wonderful exhibition, and I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to go through the exhibition a couple of times already. I just want to backtrack a little bit here and talk about, and maybe have a little bit of discussion about the significance of the Bauhaus as it relates to specifically industrial design. Either of you would like to comment?
I think that Bredendieck, his life and his work, is a very good example for that what Bauhaus ideas have been in the 20s and have developed into our times. Because with his working at the metal workshop in the Bauhaus Dessau, I think Bredendieck was in nearly the one of the hearts of the Bauhaus. He not only designed or did sketches, but he really designed lamps and other material which went to industrial production. And that was an idea of in my opinion, most important time of the Bauhaus, not only to educate artists, but designers for real life designs and ideas. And Bredendieck in the metal workshop created desk lamps together. It's nearly none of the works of the metal workshop is really a work by one only artist, but nearly by collective ideas. Marianne Brandt, Bredendieck, Hermann Gautel, Laszlo Molinocz, they all work together on ideas and on make ideas or products better and better. So they worked on desk lamps who wouldn't blend the workers, but provide indirect light. And those ideas has not only been ideas by artists, but went into industrial production, and that is one of the great stories of the Bauhaus, so that we still use some of the designs up to our days, as those steel chairs, tabular chairs, which we all know up to now.
One of the things I might add to that is that, and as we sort of began to examine how we could feature Hen Bredendieck in this exhibit, was that a part of the story that we were necessarily telling was the importance of the Bauhaus in modern culture, in design culture. And I think too often when people hear the term Bauhaus, they may take for granted that it is in reference to an architectural style of some sort, which is not wrong. But that, one of the things that we have all been discussing is like its importance in other areas of art and craft. And one of those, industrial design, is something that weaves itself into the fabric of our lives. And so that what we're talking about is the design, the conceptualization, design, and execution of the kinds of things that we use in everyday life. It could be like the chairs that we sit on at home or at work, the utensils that we use in the kitchen or in the tool shop. And also because of the Bauhaus students, directors' interest in photography and those arts, photography and typography, that even the way in which those items, those common everyday objects, utensils, tools, etc., even the way in which they are advertised and marketed to us can oftentimes in its design presentation bear some debt to the way in which the early Bauhaus folks experimented with a variety of arts, including photography and typography. So it seemed to me like, one of the things that comes out in examining a story like this is the extent of the influence. And some of the influence is so embedded in our culture that we don't necessarily realize where it came from. And so that I thought that was a fascinating aspect of being able to examine this period of history and make those connections between the Bauhaus in Bredendieck and current culture and current design education.
I think to sort of extend that also, there was this transition from the world of the Beaux-Arts to the Bauhaus, with sort of the transition from decorative arts to a very user-centered approach and focus on the people that are going to use the products, how they're going to use them in the context that they're going to use the products. And this was a very big change and probably one of the most significant contributions of the industrial design school within the Bauhaus as well. And I know one of the things that sort of evolved from this, at the recommendation of Moholy-Nagy, Bredendieck opted to work in the metal workshop. And at that time, I think Mariana Brandt was the director of the metal workshop. And there's a very interesting photograph of Bredendieck and Brandt at work in the exhibition. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the role of Bredendieck in the metal workshop and how that evolved into his career. I know, Rainer, you talked a little bit about that already, but maybe to expand on that.
Yeah, Hen Bredendieck he became not only a student at the Bauhaus, but a member of the metal workshop. He was employed by the metal workshop very soon after starting with his work at that workshop. And by this, we can see that he had really own ideas and a very practical way of thinking, so that his ideas not only were like ideas from a student, but really went into industrial production phases. And together with Marianne Brandt, they worked for a company, Curtis and Mattison, which produced those Candem lamps. And this was one of the products of the whole Bauhaus history, which has the most distribution, and was very well used in that time and went into real production, and that was a very success of the Bauhaus times. And this is also a sign of the change between the two first directors of the Bauhaus in Germany, because Walter Gropius, who founded the Bauhaus in Weimar in 1919, he started with a school of art and applied arts, and Hannes Meyer, the second director, want to get closer to industrial production. And in that very important time of the Bauhaus history, Bredendieck was in the very middle of what happened, and he was a very important member. And so it came that amongst all the students of the Bauhaus at Dessau, Bredendieck became the only one who became a teacher at the exile station in Chicago when the new Bauhaus Chicago was opened in 1937, but it only existed for 1 year.
Just to reiterate, part of what Rainer was speaking about, and I found this exceptionally interesting, was that the fact that the production, the design ideas created in the metal workshop at the Bauhaus by Mariana Brandt and Bredendieck and others, that those are things that actually went into production, that they were creative design advisors to an actual manufacturer, and that these items like the Candem lamp that Rainer spoke of, these were real products and real successful products. And so I think that connection that perhaps traces itself to the Bauhaus, of like making the connection between the theoretical, conceptual, and then the actual industrial production of these everyday objects that are intended to make life better for the users.
And what the Bredendieck papers make so exciting or so important as well is that it nearly seems that Bredendieck didn't throw anything away, because we found hundreds of sketches of lamps, of chairs, and those sketches show not only the product in the end, but the development of the design thinking and the design process. And that is so important, because it's not difficult to find the sketch of Mies van der Rohe chairs today, but to reconstruct the way of design process and thinking and the development of those designs is very exciting for us nowadays. And I think this is a very special fact of the two parts of the wide and important Bredendieck papers at both of the places at Atlanta and now in Oldenburg, that we really can reconstruct the way of developing his ideas.
From his time in the metal shop and on through his working career in Switzerland, Bredendieck became one of the pioneers in modern lighting design. Can you discuss some of the key contributions in lighting design and some of the wonderful projects that he worked on while he was in Switzerland?
Kirk, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. From my perspective, in some ways, I think the innovations in lighting and lamps that came out of the Bauhaus Metal Workshop, they are such that they have become so ubiquitous. We hardly even think that someone had to invent that at some point. And so I kind of like to think of it in some ways as Bredendieck and others were there at the birth of the desk lamp. And some of the reading that I've done on this suggests that, there at the time in the late 1920s, the use of electric light in the home and in workplaces had developed significantly, but it was still a new thing. And what the problem that was being solved by the work of design at the Bauhaus, and then later with Bredendieck's work in Switzerland, is just how you can take a light bulb and you can put the light that you need where you want it. And the innovations that they pioneer are those things that are the extendable, adjustable desk lamp, the elbow function or the swivel function on a lot of lamps for the bedside or for the work table. And in his work in Switzerland, then he brought forward those ideas working with another designer, Siegfried Gideon, during his time in Switzerland. And also as part of that, he was involved in the renovation and basically the lighting design for the Corso Theater in Zurich, which perhaps Braden can talk more about. But all those things, you see that like Bredendieck is there at sort of the birth of ideas about how best to use light, and that developing, at least in one way that I've read, like developing a culture of lighting, where the focus is on the quality of the light and not necessarily the brightness or the quantity of light, and that what the industrial design work solves in creating useful lamps for home and work is that problem of like how you best use the light produced by a light bulb in an efficient, effective, and elegant way.
So one of the, just moving on to Bredendieck's transition to the U.S., obviously he had developed a fairly extensive network of connections through the Bauhaus, which sort of led to this opportunity to move to the U.S. And also, maybe I'm jumping forward, so there were social issues and social concerns surrounding the advent of the war and what was happening in Germany at the time that led to this whole transition. Rainer, could you maybe provide a little background on what was going on and why this was important and how Bredendieck leveraged his network to make that connection and transition?
Yeah, in 1933, Bredendieck emigrated to the US. He, in Germany, had married his wife who came from America. So he had a little bit an entry to the States. As you said, James, but he could use his network. He was still in contact with letters to Gropius. He was still in contact to Lasse Molinoc, who came to America a little bit earlier. And Walter Gropius, he immigrated first to Brittany, then to the States. Gropius had the chance to teach at Harvard, but he had the idea to to make a foundation of an exile Bauhaus at Chicago. And we have to imagine it was very complicated to meet each other, but really they met and created the idea for this exile Bauhaus, which has been created in Chicago. And nearly all the emigrated Bauhaus teachers and some of the students who emigrated to the US had been in contact. They wrote letters to each other and informed each other where they could work, where would be a possibility to create a new engagement. And so after the very short period of the new Bauhaus in Chicago, first of all, he worked together with Nathan Lerner, a very exciting, very short time at Chicago. They created a own design company until he got the involvement by the Georgia Tech.
And so, Kirk, when we walked through the exhibition earlier this week, we talked a little bit about Bredendieck's private practice in Chicago and some of the work that he did, and sort of some of the artifacts that sort of reside from that era. You want to talk a little bit about what we've seen and what's in the exhibition from that era as well?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of find the Chicago period fascinating because that's a period where, as Rainer was saying, Bredendieck had come over and was involved in education, and the funding for the new Bauhaus in Chicago fell through after the first year. And so along with Nathan Lerner, who was previously a student at the new Bauhaus, they formed a partnership to do freelance design. And some of what we have in our collections and some of what is shown in the exhibit reflects that Chicago period. We have some items that actually, represent that early Bauhaus, new Bauhaus establishment, but also in terms of like the freelance design, a few of the things that we have on display are sketches of chairs and also toys. And these are things that the Lerner-Bredendieck partnership worked on. The chair is interesting in the respect that it was a design that was created as a do-it-yourself or DIY kit that was published by the United States Gypsum Company. So it was part of a publication of DIY kit projects. And the reason I find that kind of interesting is because, everybody these days knows about IKEA and the whole flat pack system and how things, you can take it home and you can put it together yourself. Essentially what we have in the exhibit is a set of instructions, not for IKEA, but developing in Chicago concurrently with the ideas that are, being developed in Sweden to establish the IKEA company. But the chair is basically, instructions to cut a chair out of the parts of a single piece of plywood, put it together, put foam padding and cloth on the seat, and you have a chair. And so it's interesting to me that they were experimenting with those kinds of ideas and basically putting them out in the market, not as a production piece, but as something that you could do yourself. And then the other part of that, and that's on display that is interesting, are some of the designs for toys, which are evident in the Play School toy line. And as we noted when we were walking through the exhibit the other day, there are a number of these designs which seem to still be in production that I can remember from my childhood, and in some cases from my children's childhood. And these consist of various wooden style toys that have you hammering or assembling blocks or assembling rings and putting them on a pedestal and so forth and so on. And it's just wonderful to be able to look at the design process behind some of those things in the sketches that we have on display. So this is a very interesting period where Lerner and Bredendieck are out on their own, sort of establishing a practice. But again, I think part of the story is that they fold back into the educational process because the Institute of Design is established in the late 1940s as a successor institute, and that sort of carries forward the ideas of the new Bauhaus and the Bauhaus in education. And again, so by the end of the 40s, Bredendieck is back into sort of a university setting and carrying forward the design education ideas of the Bauhaus and sort of pushing those out to a new generation of students.
So the transition also from Germany to Chicago to Atlanta allowed Bredendieck to begin to implement his own version of the curriculum of the Bauhaus. And there were some changes in this as he went forward. Obviously, the Bauhaus had a very heavy focus on material and innovation and material and creative use of material, and had developed a series of workshops focused on materials and the growth and use of materials. Bredendieck wasn't necessarily totally satisfied with that approach and had a different sense of where things needed to go. Would either of you care to comment on sort of where that took him and sort of the role that has played in the evolution of design here?
Yeah, in Dessau, Bredendieck was only a student and then a member of the metal workshop in the early Chicago times. Laszlo Molinacci was still the very head of the new Bauhaus Chicago, but in the later Chicago times and at least at Atlanta, he had really the chance, as you already said, to transform the Bauhaus ideas slightly to his ideas. And it's very interesting to see what he took over from the very early times, from the Albers preliminary pre-course at the Bauhaus Dessau to his way of teaching at Atlanta, and in which other parts he transformed those practices. Because he has been a carpenter in his very early years, so he was very interested in works with wood and hand sculptures, little sculptures, to get practice in the workshop experience. And that's very interesting to see that he not stuck with the early Bauhaus ideas, but transformed this in his times and for another purposes in the later years.
And so, go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah, it was interesting to me to think that, to see Bredendieck not simply as a person who's transmitting the ideas of the Bauhaus and promoting them, but also transforming them and figuring out what he, as I think really based on his early days as a practical craftsman, a hands-on person, what he brings to the idea of teaching those skills, and also then including design skills, conceptualization skills, to a new generation of students. So it's, I think, one of the things that we benefit from at Georgia Tech is that he brought the Bauhaus pedagogy forward to us, but he didn't simply rest on that idea. He would continue to examine how best to be an instructor in an educational context, to develop those ideas, and to in some sense almost make design a scientific process, which there we do get into like the idea of ergonomics and study that shows the studies that show us how a person interacts with an object and what makes sense and what does not make sense in terms of creating the objects of everyday life.
And I think this is a new part of Bauhaus research as well, because we know really quite a lot about Joseph Albers at Black Mountain College and about Gropius at Harvard and so on. But the story of that transformation of the Bauhaus ideas to the ID practice at Atlanta has been quite new, and a new aspect in the Bauhaus history as well.
So it's interesting in the gallery to see the student work coming out of Georgia Tech, and sort of you see the exercises and the transformation of material and the experimentation that are very much based on the basic course that was taught in the Bauhaus. But then there's this transition to the integration of the different studios, the different material studios, the integration of metal and wood, and sort of the results that come up in student projects resulting from that. So are there any particular examples of student work that stand out in the exhibition, Kirk, from your perspective, from the students at Georgia Tech?
One of the pieces that we have on display actually references typography more specifically. And it's an example where, again, like this, an idea that we're very familiar with nowadays, the idea of iteration and ideation as you develop a design process. But one of the things that we heard from many of his former students whom we've interviewed and whom Rainer Gloria had also interviewed for the book is that he was insistent on developing, a number of ideas, improving them, and to working through a process until you arrived at a solution that was, if you were a student, you hoped it was satisfactory. Some of what we've heard from his students was that he would begrudgingly say that, yes, that's that's fine. You can stop now, but you were never sure. And I think one of the things that we have in the exhibit, in terms of like representing that idea, is a typographical example of where a student has developed a series of monogram logo types. And so there's multiples of each. And what he's showing in a very finished product, these aren't simple sketches. That all that work is lost to us because I'm sure he did a lot of work before he got to the board that we have on display. Represents various iterations of a monogram on this student's own name. And they're also grouped in terms of categories like block lettering, rounded lettering, so forth and so on. And so you can see we show that as an example adjacent to some, sketches of Bredendieck himself where he's experimenting with typography and so forth. And you can see him working through a similar process in a much rougher form, because I think he's just doing it as an exercise, at his desk and not for a finished product. But that also, hints back to like just another aspect of the Bauhaus and their concern with like development of typography. But the context in which we were displaying it there is that example of like the iteration and ideation as a crucial part of the design process that he wanted to convey to his students.
So related to that, we have a question from the audience asking whether Bredendieck did any work around color theory.
When we met the former students first time at Georgia Tech, one of them told us about his ideas on colors. When I reflected right, he insisted that only very few and very clear colors should be used, as gray and white and red, and never green should be used, because green is the color of the nature and shouldn't be the color for design. And later on, he did, I think he bought a green car, and one of the students asked him, why did you buy a green car? You told us that green can't be a color for design or another product. And then he wasn't still sticking with that idea. So I don't think that he had a hard colored theory, but he reflected all those aspects of design processes and design products. But he, as you hear, I think he hasn't been as dogmatic and not as Piet Mondrian or the style artist.
So based on the work that you've done, on both of you have done on the exhibition to date, what do you think is Bredendieck's most significant contribution to the design field?
The way that I've sort of, for myself, created, the big picture idea is that his contributions are kind of twofold. There is a design contribution, and that I think that goes back to the metal workshop and the lighting and the lamps and those kinds of things. So that's he as a designer produced a product. But the other part is that he remains involved with education, and he remains involved with his Bauhaus network throughout the years, and so that his other contribution isn't a product that appears in museum catalogs necessarily, but it's a product that is the creation and development of an educational process for future generations to create things. So I see him like his contribution is there as a designer, but his contribution is also there as an educator. And I think both of those things are important parts of the story.
In 2019, the Penn State University made a conference about Bauhaus transfers. And when Gloria and me and I read those conference theme, we suddenly thought that that's typical for Bredendieck. He he was really a Bauhaus transformer into another time, into another country, into another language. He transformed those German Weimar Republic Bauhaus ideas into a new world. That's, in my opinion, the most exciting contribution of him.
So we've got time for a couple of questions. If anyone from the audience has anything more they would like to find out or ask of Kirk or Rainer, happy to do that. As we sort of wait to see whether there are any further, I'd like to ask specifically whether there are any particular artifacts or parts of the exhibition that you individually find most engaging.
One of the things that is interesting to me, and because it's an interesting part of the story, and it's just the smallest thing, and it's not even really a design object created by the Bauhaus or by Bredendieck, but it's the souvenir ship's log that represents, to me, it's kind of this very small thing, but it tells us when and how he made this transition from Europe, from Germany to the United States. And I think that's, I kind of see it in a symbolic way because I see it as representative of a kind of journey that was important to him to make and that facilitated the rest of his life as a designer and educator. And then I also see it like representing the same kind of transition that many of his colleagues, his fellow students, and his former instructors made that created this network in the United States and elsewhere that we benefit from in terms of what they brought in terms of design thinking and also design educational approaches. And so that's an instance where like I look at a single thing, a single object, and I see, oh, this is a pivot point that's very interesting in being able to tell that story. And it's also sort of like, represents a very important and crucial pivot point for us as the inheritors of the designs and the educational approaches.
I think for Gloria and me, a lot of the material from the Georgia Tech collections is still connected with our research history, and we know about some parts of the story which were really hard to reconstruct, and we went to Zurich to use the Siegfried Gideon papers to find out the story of in Bredendieck in Switzerland. And then when we came to Atlanta, we found a mass of photographs and sketches and leaflets from the Swiss time, and it's so intriguing and fascinating to find the parts of a life and a work at so different places today. And this is a part of the life and work of Hein Bredendieck as well, that he really stored and kept the material which was very important for him, and used those leaflets and photographs and sketches from the Swiss time for his teaching at Atlanta. So we've been so excited to find those very specific Swiss papers at Atlanta. So a lot of the material is connected to our research project and process.
Well, thank you both so much. This is a wonderful exhibition and certainly worthwhile for anyone to see. It's a exquisite history of Bredendieck and his sort of transition and the evolution of his career and how he brought design to us here at Georgia Tech. And we're very grateful for the time and effort the two of you put together to bring this to us. So I would like to thank both of you for your contribution and opportunity to participate in this session. So at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Catherine to wrap up the meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. This was a really great event, and I appreciate all of you lending your expertise from 3 different perspectives. And before we end, I want to just give out a few thank yous to the people who helped make this exhibit possible. I want to thank Kirk Henderson and Dr. Rainer Stamm for doing this event today and also curating this exhibit. I'd like to thank Gloria Kupnik for doing the research that led to this exhibit. Thank you to the Landesmuseum in Oldenburg, the Halle Foundation for funding, the Georgia Tech College of Design and School of Industrial Design, especially you, Professor Jim Budd. I'd also like to thank the family and the former students of Hen Bredendieck for generously sharing their stories and even their lamps with us for this exhibit. Thank you to the Consulate General of Germany for supporting us, for Dr. Jennifer Gernt for helping move this whole process along and facilitating the collaboration across in two countries. And finally, thank you to the Georgia Tech Library leadership and our Georgia Tech Library Archives leadership. Leslie and Jody, thank you for supporting us in this endeavor. And we are so happy that you've joined us. And hopefully you'll join us for our final event, which is a book talk with Rainer and Gloria. If you haven't gleaned from today, all of this research started with a book about Hen Bredendieck. And so we're doing a book talk. This will be on April 25th. It'll be virtual on a similar format. So we hope you can join us for that. Thanks for joining today. I mentioned in the chat that this event will be recorded and archived. So if you'd like to share it with anyone or watch at a later date, that'll be possible. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.